Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everybody. Thank you for joining us for this Cloudbees webinar, helped by the DevOps.com folks that are always available to help with your webinar needs. We're excited to bring to you today a pretty awesome topic about DevSecOps. Everybody's talked a lot about adding more security and robustness to the pipelines, but can you trust your DevSecOps pipeline? And that's the topic of conversation for today. Next slide. We've got a bunch of great panelists who will be joining us. I'm sure there's some housekeeping rules that I should tell you before we get started, like use headphones and have really good Wi-Fi. But I'm pretty sure you guys know, you folks know, to have good audio and good headphones, and we're not having to listen to you necessarily, so don't worry about that. However, I do want to make sure that the folks who are speaking have good audio and good headphones, so I'm going to introduce them. Our first guest is Patrick Dubois. Patrick, introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks for having me, Sam. I'm Patrick Dubois. Since beginning this year, I joined Snyk as the Director of DevOps Relationships, and I'm also like advisor there. And I decided to be on this panel. I have a background in DevOps in general for, let's say, about 10 years. And now I'm diving in the last couple of months in DevSecOps, and I'm like having fun with it.
Wonderful. Well, it's nice to have you here. And when he says he's got like a background in DevOps, he sort of came up with the word DevOps.
That's just an accident, Sam. Just don't worry about that.
There are a lot of happy accidents. That's a fabulous thing, but it's great for the whole industry. We're excited to have you here.
Thank you.
Mitch Ashley, I'm going to skip over to you. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself.
Great. Thanks, Sam. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'm CEO and Managing Analyst at Accelerated Strategies Group, where we focus on DevOps and cybersecurity and digital transformation. I'm both a product CEO, CTO, as well as a CIO for IT. So,
wonderful. All right, Mitch, we're super happy to have you here as well. Thank you for joining. And last but not least, Anders.
Hi, I'm Anders Walgren. I am Field CTO at Cloudbees, and before Electric Cloud became a part of Cloudbees, I was the CTO for nearly 15 years at Electric Cloud, and very happy to be here. Kind of psyched and happy to be actually doing something these days.
Nice, very good. Well, it's nice to see you out and about again. And I'm Sam Fell. I'll be hosting and moderating this conversation. We want to make this interactive. We've got a really impressive number of folks on the line here. I think this is a topic that resonates with folks. And so we're really excited to make this a two-way conversation. We're actually going to be starting a whole new series of virtual events called the Software Delivery Leadership Forum, which are going to be just like this, but with even more conversation with the audience. So we're really looking for the audiences, as Patrick put it earlier. The audience should do a little bit of work during this webinar. So if you have any questions about the topics that are being discussed, put them in the chat. My job will be to make sure that those get surfaced and that we have a chance to talk through them. So if we could go to the next slide, let's talk through the topic.
Yeah, so today's topic, DevSecOps practices help build security and quality into the software delivery process by making everyone responsible for security at every stage. But how do you make sure your process is doing the right things? So today we're gonna talk about, and you'll hear, and hopefully you'll participate as well and make the conversation better, everyone. Pragmatic approaches to prioritize security efforts for maximum impact. Tips to make security the path of least resistance for everyone on the team, and how delivery pipelines can integrate new technology and security controls into the process.
Lovely. And next slide. And we're going to jump right into the topics. And the first topic that we'd like to talk about is, what are some of those pragmatic approaches that we can use to prioritize the different security efforts that you're going to be implementing to get maximum impact in your organization? There's so many different places to start. Where should you start? So if we go to the next slide, I think Patrick, he's up first. Patrick's ideas on where we should start.
Yeah, it's a lot of people think about when you put like the security and the trust, they have the security people in mind. I come from a more holistic background, thinking there's a couple of more groups. There's Dev, Sec, and Ops, who are working together. And so if you're looking at what they're trying to do in the pipeline, the developers are optimizing for features, the Ops for stability, and the security folks, they're optimizing for risk, or like, you know, avoiding risk. And I think one of the challenges people have is that they see these three as three different backlogs, where in reality it's a combination of all the backlogs together. And that's like one of the friction points that you have to realize when you're like introducing this kind of, you know, delivery pipeline security, is that these three things need to be aligned. So the way that I think about it is that if you look at the whole system, this friction point is like how they kind of work together. The goal is that once you find the right balance, you can only find the right balance between DevOps and Sec and priorities on the risk by having them collaborate and talk to each other. The ultimate goal is the business, obviously, because they have to find that balance and decide on the balance between those three kind of separate, pseudo-separate backlogs. And the way they can put that is they can kind of put like policies in place or guidance. So my advice would be, like, if you see the system, you have those backlogs, you get all the information, you prioritize by, you know, what the business decides. And then the goal is to empower each of the teams or each of the groups by a set of rules and by a set of like guidance to make the decisions themselves. So it isn't like a central organ that security decides on all the policies. It's something that becomes embedded in the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the ways that I think about this, just to sort of echo that, is if you don't think about security as a feature, as a first-class citizen of what you're doing, and quality in general, as a first-class citizen and a first-class feature in what you're doing, then you won't achieve it by accident. You know, you're not going to stumble into a secure solution or stumble into a high-quality solution. That has to be something that you set out to do and have, you know, explicit things that you do in order to achieve that goal. And I think in the past, you know, as with everything else kind of waterfall, what we've tended to do is think of, you know, security, performance, quality as something that you add in after you've written all the code. Whereas, I mean, in fact, what you might do to make something better, you know, higher quality or more secure, is remove things or add more things in. And of course, you know, you can't, you know, sort of my analogy that I trot out all the time is, security is not like some condiment that you sprinkle on top of the plate before you serve the food. Security is a core ingredient in the meal. And if you don't think about where do you buy your security, where do you get the best security, you know, who has the freshest security, you know, who, you know, how do we do farm to table security? You know, maybe I could stretch that out.
Do you like food, Anders?
Yeah, I haven't eaten breakfast yet. So I think it's, you know, I think it's one of those things where if you don't talk about it up front and treat it as something that's a core part of what you do, it's not going to happen by accident. So I think, you know, the deliberate and deliberative process of security and quality is very important, because if you don't do it, it ain't happening.
If I can add to what you both said, which I agree with both of you, and I think those are fantastic perspectives. I was just meeting with a venture capitalist firm who focuses primarily on security. And there's always that debate of, how does security get involved? Should developers know more about security? Should security people know more about software? I think that the real goal, but one of the real goals behind DevSecOps is just like Dev and Ops working together. You not only get a better appreciation, but you understand the function and how it really needs to happen and what you do to design software to support it and vice versa. Same thing with security. Yeah, it's shift left, but it's really about getting people to work together and learning from each other. And by collaborating, that's how those things get baked in. It becomes intentional.
Yep, exactly. Awesome. Okay, so any other comments on this topic? We can move on to Anders.
Maybe
Yeah,
I've just one. The fact that you know, this, like, one of the similarities that I started seeing is this like, everybody's trying their best to prioritize things as well, right? Like ops, when things go down, what they have to do, like, what system do we keep running and what can we cut? The same thing with the people delivering the features, like, what features will we do first because our backlog's too big, or like, what bug or what security vulnerability will we fix? And security folks have the same thing. They have like limited capacity, and so everybody's prioritizing all the time. And if you don't have the context or the right set of values that you're trying to prioritize for, and that's not clear, we're all just running around like chickens without head, and that's reality, and that creates a lot of friction points that we have to avoid there.
If you can be part of that decision-making process together, I think people accept the compromise much easier versus having to fight for their priorities, right?
Yeah, and I think it's, there is no such thing as perfect, bug-free, 100% secure anything, much less software. So it's just a question of, do we know the quality of what we're shipping? Do we know the security of what we're shipping? Do we know what the risks are? Are they acceptable to us? Because you can never, we will never achieve perfection in this. So it's always a question of how close to zero can you get? But more importantly, what do you know about what you're shipping? And what do you know about the quality of that? And what are the risks that you're accepting? And can you get a handle around what are the risks that we don't understand, that we don't know about? How do we dig into those things? And that's often that's a rude awakening for people when they get hacked, is, oh, I didn't realize that was a problem, right? And so it's that sort of thing. And that's where education and community and experience and working together, I think really helps quite a bit, as opposed to treating it as a silo.
Right. So to that point, Parag, and forgive me if I'm saying your name incorrectly, Parag asks, are there any strategies that you folks would recommend to help get the DevSec and Ops teams working together more? Patrick, you talked about these prioritization queues and how do you bring that team together? And somebody else mentioned if people are part of that process, they'll feel a lot more aligned with it and a lot more supportive. How do you get to that point?
Yeah, so it's I once asked the question I repeatedly asked the question to developers, like, what's your biggest problem with the security folks, right? And they're not available when we need to make decisions. And so the point there is that when you invite them, like when the backlog is prioritized, when they need to be there, that's a great time to have them involved. When the final tests are running, that's a great point in time to have them involved. I know security is struggling with like capacity, and that's why they have to kind of start delegating, putting more policies, general sense, and that like the fact that they're empowering the devs to do work for them under their guidance, but to be there more when decisions need to be made. So being available there in the process, I think that's like the number one thing I would look at to get people in the room, get them talking about it, like Anders said, and that creating that focus instead of just sending an email. This is the policy. We're all good, because it's easy to put in a policy in place, but at what cost for a feature? At what cost of stability? At what cost for the business?
Yeah, and I think too. I mean, historically we've and we'll continue to, because it's a sort of a scarcity problem. We're going to continue in this mode where what we do is we optimize for the scarcity of the security resource, the individual, that talent set. And the way that you optimize for keeping that resource as busy as possible to amortize the cost of that resource is you form a line out the cube, right? Wherever the security person's office is, you either have a real or a virtual line of people waiting to have their security concerns addressed, answered, approved, whatever the interaction is going to be. Similar thing that we've done for DBAs, right? DBAs are a relatively scarce and expensive talent, so we tend to have people who are dedicated to that function, and then everybody just forms a queue. That optimizes to keep that resource very busy and high utilization, which is good. But at the same time, that means you're going to have latency until you can have your concerns addressed. And that's kind of the complaint, right? Is you make me wait to get an approval for these things, and that slows me down. There's, I mean, I'm not a queuing theory expert, but I only know of so many ways to sort of help break that logjam. You either hire more people or you somehow make that more automated or get that process to be more efficient. But Damon
Edwards would talk about making it all self-service, right? Why would you have to put in a ticket? Why can't this just be some automated thing that happens? And it's sort of, and we have I think it's part of a talk track and a conversation for us to have in a few slides, but how do you make the secure path the path of least resistance? because people don't want to be bothered. People don't want to have to wait for someone else. I want to get my job done. I want to get my work done, and I want to see it in somebody's hands. So, so that's really good. Awesome. So let's move on to the next slide. And another way of prioritizing security efforts for maximum impact, and Anders' one takeaway here for us to talk about was balancing the measurement frequency and depth. So Anders, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so what this sort of short little snippet of text is really getting at is and I should say this explicitly. I put security next to quality as peers. I mean, to me, security is quality, right? There's not a big difference except sort of in the individual details and the skill set in terms of what quality is and what security is. A security bug is a bug, you know. It may have huge impact on people, but so will bugs. You know, if you have a bug in your radiation device, medical device, and you deliver 10 times the radiation you were supposed to, that's not a security bug per se, but that's a much more serious bug than most security bugs, at least to the person who's in the beam path. But security and quality in general, it's a measurement problem, right? Because what we're trying to do is measure the quality or measure the security of something, because we can't achieve 100% security, we can't achieve 100% quality. What we're trying to do is measure, and of course find the problems so we can fix them. But that's a fortunate side effect of the measurement problem. And whenever you have a measurement problem, you have to think in terms of how frequently do we measure and how deeply do we measure the quality. And where that comes around to sort of practical, pragmatic ways of thinking is if you look at your CI pipeline, right? You want to optimize your CI pipeline for speed. You know, you want that thing to turn around in 10, 15, 20 minutes, right? You can't run all of your tests that you need to run before you ship your product or deploy it into production in 10 to 15 minutes. If you can, you have a trivial application, which is awesome. Well done. If you can solve a problem with a trivial application, please do so, right? I'm not arguing to build more complex applications at all, but what I'm starting to kind of talk to people about is if you have only one pipeline for your software and it's your CI pipeline, you probably are either running much too much stuff in that pipeline and it's taking you an hour or 2 hours all day, or you're not doing enough testing or not enough automated testing. And so and this is something that we've done for years with our own products, is we just have multiple pipelines that are sort of kicked off by each other. CI pipeline succeeds, we go to the next pipeline, which is more integration testing and more system testing and soak testing and performance testing and all of those things. And so what you need to do is kind of look across all the things you need to do and then decide, how frequently do I need to do this? And the answer is probably I don't need to run all of my system tests for every CI cycle, because if I take that on, my CI cycle is going to be 4 hours long, right? If we When we just to give an example, when we do the kind of the full all platform, run everything, do all tests, upgrade tests, schema change tests, all of these things for the Flow product, that's a 24-hour process. That's half a dozen platforms with hundreds of thousands of automated tests that run. Installers get built, installers get installed. All of this stuff happens. We obviously don't want a 24-hour cycle for CI, so we have a very separate, smaller subsection where we do that stuff. So keep in mind when you're setting up your pipeline or your pipelines, where do you want the frequency and where do you want the depth? Because you want high frequency for CI, but that means you can't go as deep as you may want to before you release or deploy into production. So then you need to think in terms of, at what frequency do I want to run the deeper tests, the integration tests, the system tests, all of those things. And I think as you start to tease those things apart, what you see is that it gets a lot easier to maintain a fast, rapid turnaround CI pipeline. Because if you ever look at a test and say, well, that's kind of a slow test, you got to ask yourself, do I need to run that every single CI cycle? And the answer generally should be no. Let's run that in the follow-on cycle, that when we have a successful CI cycle, or maybe a few of them, or maybe just once a day, right? Or every few hours, you run that follow-on set of things. And then there are certain things that you maybe only need to run once a week or once before you release, although I caution against the once before you release, because that tends to become the, okay, if we find something, what do we do kind of a scenario. So, that once before you release is sort of the opposite of shift left, right? But you do not need the same frequency of measurement for all the measurements that you do in your pipeline. So all the security tests don't need to get run every time. All the SOAP tests don't need to get run all the time. Same with integration and system tests and all of those things. And as you start to tease those things apart, it just becomes a lot easier to maintain the performance and the characteristics of those pipelines that you need. And that's a big thing.
And then each part of the pipeline is doing the thing that it needs to do. CI is giving fast feedback to developers to make sure that it's building correctly. And the rest is helping you understand the state of the quality of the application, which I think is really good.
And I think just one last bit on that is, and I think too, working with your engineers, especially the people writing software, writing tests in particular, to understand what it takes to write a high-performing, reliable, non-flaky unit test, that you don't always need to write an integration test. You don't always need to write a system test. One of the things that we talk about in our engineering organization is if something escapes the dev organization, if something escapes into production or escapes into the the later tiers in your pipeline, the question that we always want to ask is what was the fastest, cheapest way that we could have caught that as a unit test? And if the answer is you can't catch it as a unit test because it's database specific behavior, it only happens on Oracle, not on SQL Server or MySQL or something like that, then yeah, you're going to need an integration or a system test. But that tells you that it's not something that you should run in your CI process. So that thinking of what's the fastest, most high performing, reliable test that I can write, that's a skill that you have to learn. That's not something we're born with. And I've seen, and I've done it myself over the years a lot, where it's easier to write a system test or an integration test. You just a few command lines and boom, you're done. The problem is in order to get to that part, you've got hours and hours and hours of stuff you've got to do first sometimes. So it's that mindset of what's the cheapest and fastest way that I can test this or verify this is also another mindset that's good to have. That pays off in security as well as in quality.
Well, sure. Patrick, any thoughts on this balancing measurement frequency and depth?
Yeah, it's. I don't think it's only speed, right? Like the exercise I do sometimes with a group of people is I ask them like, okay, given that you have 30 days, okay, what test would you run? And they say, oh, we're running all this stuff. And then I move it to 5 days. Like, what if you only have like 5 days? What if you only have like an hour? And then that, like, it's almost like, what if you didn't have CI? What would you do? And it isn't about just the speed of delivering. It's again like effort, risk, like what like this constraint that you have to live with, and this prioritization is kind of key. And the way that I think about the pipeline is it's like a sonar system, right? So you probe, okay, feedback, probe a little bit further, and then get more feedback. And so the first probe has to, have the biggest bang for the buck, because that's kind of what we're going for. And I live by the principle of just enough, right? Don't overdo it. Don't like overly optimize. I've seen that happen in the ops world. Like people go wild under automation, and then there's other parts of their stuff that just are like immature totally. So this kind of balancing act all the time, like what effort are we doing? What are we getting in return? And that's kind of a great like way of looking at this process and kind of balancing the act between speed and necessity of that's kind of something that we need to do.
Awesome. Mitch, I'm going to ask you to chime in as well. We're getting lots of great questions from people, from Mark and Nuj and Parag, more questions from Parag. So I love to see the questions coming in. I'm seeing them. We will get to them. Go ahead, Mitch.
Great. Yeah. Well, what I wanted to do is just tie this and the last topic together is there's inside the CI/CD and the development and testing process, but also the metrics that come out of this. And I appreciate what you were saying too about Patrick, because the security folks think of security that just the same way. What's enough, right? How much do we really need? But to that point about measurement, the visibility of those metrics can be a real confidence builder between dev and security to say, oh, we are running the tests. Oh, we are finding issues. Where are we finding those issues? They're getting resolved. It's that, if you're not involved in the everyday process, like maybe a CISO or someone or one of the security engineers, it's a real confidence builder. It's a reassuring that us working together is showing up in how we work and the work that's getting done. So that's super valuable too about where this is happening and what we're finding and how to share that information.
And that's a cultural thing too, right? Because you have to work in a culture where it's okay to find problems, right? Mm-hmm. where it's okay to say, oh, we put some code in and we figured out that there's a security problem with that code, and to look at that as a win. You know,
Right.
the win is we detected it before we shipped it, right? The system works. Now, can I do better next time by not writing the code that way in the first place? Of course, but the system worked, and you know, celebrate that win instead of, oh my God, security problem. You know, we can't be finding security problems. Like, no, we ought to be finding security problems. If we're not, they're definitely there. They're definitely there. So if we're not finding them, we're not doing our jobs.
Right.
To that point,
So
before we, all right, go ahead. I was just going to say, to that point, before we had such great automation and able to get metrics easily, one of the sort of tactile, in addition to data, that I would use is, are we finding big enough bugs? Are we finding security? If we're not finding them, then I know we're not ready to ship. And, you know, so you have to find that stuff because they are there. It always happens. And so it's a good way to look at the data to tell you the same message.
Right. Let's go to the next slide while I ask this question from James, which I think is relevant to the conversation about developers. How do you change the developer mentality to be more focused towards including security in the work that they're doing? So you're talking about frequency of measurement, and you're talking about how quickly you get that feedback. How do you make it so that it's not even something that is a reaction, but proactively thought about by the developers? Is there any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's, so I've seen the process happen with dev and ops, right? So ops has empowered devs and made them co-owner of the solution that they're delivering, not only in dev, but also in production. And so if security would empower the devs to do the same thing, and that they can take ownership of making the decisions themselves, you know, that's a whole different psychology feeling that having to live by somebody else's rules. No, they are doing the balancing act. They're taking all variables into account to do that. And it's to the point earlier about building confidence. Like, one of the things that puzzled me is that a CI system builds up confidence, but doesn't actually build up trust. So the only thing we're doing is that if we just keep repeating the process, we hope it will have all the time the same results. But guess what? The world, it changes all the time, and we don't know that. And what if, I ask sometimes the question, what if your CI system fails? Will people do the right decision? Will people do the right thing? Because if you know they're doing that, that's when they like, you have trust. You don't just have confidence, you have trust in the system, in the people, that they're doing the right thing. So that's kind of my take on it.
Awesome. Anyone else that want to chime in? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question. How to make security the path of least resistance? I think that's a theme that people are hearing. How do we make this not some special thing? How do we make it so that instead of someone having to go, you know, I've got this urgent Sev1 P1 thing, I need to get it out, I'm going to just skip static analysis. I'm going to skip my scan. Probably not a great idea. How do you make sure that people are doing the right things each time? Next slide.
I would just throw in two things, Sam. One is sort of, let's dispel the myth that developers don't care about security. They do. No developer wants to write insecure code.
Sure.
So just kind of getting that out of the way is a huge benefit too, and helps people work together.
Right, but it's the same thing as I want to be skinny, and yet I don't put the effort in to do that. So, right, it's just my focus is on something else. As a developer, really what I want to do is get valuable features out there. Having them say, I want to get valuable features out there, but I also am going to use these methods or these principles or follow these sort of guidelines to help make sure that I'm following whatever policies I need to make sure that my code's secure. That may not always be top of mind for developers.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
All right.
But I think that's actually like a business a problem in a way, that if you have 3 people shouting at you in opposite directions, right? You can't handle what you need to do first. And it's coming back to that backlog shout. And I think doing that exercise, and that, you know, to the point of the next slide, map out the process and find the real bottleneck, it's kind of, if you are like doing that globally with the whole team, with the business, the devs might say, oh, my bottleneck is here in my code and I can just optimize the code. No, the ops says like, no, here's my bottleneck now. And then the business says, no. No matter what, like, I know it's not secure and I'm taking the risk. Security people, I'm fine with it. I just want to move this feature to production because, hey, it's going to give us money and then we'll improve. So finding that balance.
Yeah,
Mitch, you wanted to chime in? Oh, sorry.
That's applicable kind of in general in an even broader context outside of security and quality, because if you had, this is the example I give, which is a funny example to give since we sell build acceleration tools as part of our product suite. But if you have a 2-hour CI process and then you have 6 weeks of manual testing, don't bother making your 2-hour CI process 20 minutes. Wait on that. Focus on your 6 weeks of manual testing, because it doesn't matter if you have a 5-minute CI process if you then have another, it's the elephant in the room is that 6 weeks or that 1 week or even 1 day, right? So be careful of local optimizations, right? And siloing often leads to local optimizations because we're all looking at a different part of the elephant. And so we decide what kind of animal we think it is, and then we go off and optimize for that. And if we take that 2-hour CI build and make it 5 minutes or even 2 minutes, and then we have that 6 weeks of manual testing, we haven't moved the ball forward at all. We're not changing the ship date or necessarily the quality of what comes out at all. We're making an improvement. I'm not saying we're not, but you gotta work. As the slide says, find the real bottleneck. And if you don't have a big picture view of your whole end-to-end process, or at least someone or some group of people collectively have a big picture view of your entire end-to-end process, then you're always at risk of doing local optimizations that are not going to move the ball forward in a material, meaningful way. So the more big picture you can have when you decide where to put those resources and what to fix, the better. Or a slightly different way of putting that, which is something that I heard at a security conference a few years ago, and I forget who said it, but it was, don't spend $1 million protecting a $5 asset, right? There has to be proportionality here. And so you got to worry about where the real problems are. And if you're spending $1 million to protect a $5 asset, maybe just buy more of those $5 assets, instead, because you can buy a lot of those for $1 million. Funny thing to say, not necessarily real, but you got to worry about where we live in a resource, either time or money or people skill set, in a resource limited world. We can't do it all, so it's always a question of, as Patrick's been saying, what is the stack ranked list of things that we're going to do, and what's the order in which we're going to tackle them, and because we're not going to do them all. So that ordering is really important, because the stuff at the bottom is not going to get done, and we need to be able to live with that stuff not getting done.
That's right. Mitch, any thoughts on the mapping of the process to find the real bottleneck? Sounds very, very value stream.
It goes back to the Phoenix Project and the whole thinking about this as a quality process in manufacturing, and it's really easy to sub-optimize or over-optimize and focus on the wrong thing. So I think one of the things is, this is a place really important to listen to people, because sometimes where the bottleneck you think it is, it's not actually where the bottleneck is. And you can find from a developer, from someone from ops or security, and really understand where it is, or maybe more importantly, what's causing it, and get that thing out of the way. And one of the counterintuitive results can be, sometimes you can eliminate something altogether. So, well, why are we doing that? That was put in there 2 years ago, but those conditions don't exist anymore. Right. We've replaced that architecture, so why are we testing performance that way, or whatever it might be? Right. So keep in mind, both what's obvious may not be obvious, it may be elsewhere, and also there's counter solutions to the problem.
Yeah, the scaffolding is still there, but the house is no longer there, right? So
yeah, exactly.
What's the point? Yeah.
And the same bottleneck doesn't always, the solutions to the bottleneck can change over time. I think a good example is that in the traditional way, let's say there's a very sensitive configuration file in production. Nobody is allowed to touch that unless there's a sign off by 5 people in the whole company and so on. But guess what? If the going gets tough and it's like production is down and that file needs to be changed and the systems are down, the business are shouting, Are we going to wait for those 5 people to wake up in the morning, have their fine sign up? No. So that solution is not appropriate anymore in these days. And it is about, okay, a different tactic that I heard, for example, somebody at Etsy suggested that they put in the file, and when somebody would touch the file, they would say, hey, you're touching the file. You're allowed to touch the file because, you know, we trust you, but we're just going to send this out to 5 people, right? It's the same thing you achieve. People got that information. People got like informed that this thing is happening. But the only way you could do that is to trust that person to make the decision and give him enough guidance and competence and training so he can make that decision. So that's a different approach to the same bottleneck, but in a different context. So I like that you brought that up, Mitch, that these things change over time.
Yeah, and Brian in the chat here is saying Reinertsen. You guys know Reinertsen, a great author. I know our friend Charlie Betts from Forrester talks about him all the time. I'm not sure exactly what the quote was, but he's saying that once you clear a bottleneck, you create another one somewhere else, or at least you'd find the next one.
Right.
You're right. You may not be creating one, but you're damn sure going to find the next one. If you clear one, you'll find another.
Hopefully what you're doing is you're blowing up the biggest rock, but yeah, behind that big rock, you're going to find a slightly smaller rock.
That's
so
right.
blow that one up too. I mean, it's, you know.
So the hard part is in bottlenecks that move, if the bottleneck is outside your authority, because that means you can't really fix it. And so with, you know, DevOps and Snyk brought together, you know, it feels that everything's kind of under a central control to kind of, you know, balance the decisions. But, you know, I've been talking at like a couple of years ago that, you know, the bottleneck could very well be in HR. It could be in legal. It could be like anywhere in the process that we don't think about. We tend to think about the pipeline as a technology problem, but guess what? It's like corporate problem. It's like people, it's the process, it's like the business, suppliers. There's so many like different bottlenecks that you can have. I'm not saying you can change them all, but you know, that is part of mapping the system. It's not just like your part that you see, is that whatever people depend on you or you depend on other people, that's also like important.
Yeah, David is asking, how do you handle when you have multiple lines of business that each have their own process? He wants to try and get them all on the same page so that they can maximize that. Again, mapping out that process, if you got 50 different processes, it's kind of hard to map out and optimize. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, you have to leave room for flexibility because not every process can necessarily be 100% the same as every other process. But you know, less variety tends to be easier to manage and easier to optimize. But it's a judgment call. You know, is it better to spend time making all of these processes look the same or similar to each other, or is it better to sort of dive into one process and figure that one out? It's very situational what the right thing is in terms of doing that.
Why do all these different development teams have different tools, and why do all these business things have different processes? Because they needed them, because that worked for them at some point. So taking it away may not be the right thing. Yeah, but it is good.
It's true, but sometimes you have to bring new perspective. I think when people went from IT on site to IT to the cloud, and one of the examples was like, hey, I can't make VLANs on Amazon. How am I going to do security? Like I like that was like my part, and they were like trying to like push that in somehow. They can still do the same kind of concept, and that sometimes it's just beats reframing. Again, on the solution, it might be the same problem, but your context and giving new solutions. And that's usually why I say, like people say, the tools don't matter. Just use, you know, the culture, and you know that matters. But I do believe that there's an interaction between both of them. That a tool can change the behavior of people. If the tool brings in like a new paradigm or a new way of thinking about the problem, that can change that. And then maybe that's like solves part of why you're special to become, you know, oh, we're all doing the same thing right now. I see you nodding, Anders.
Yeah, no, I mean, so much of what we do is historical accident, right? It's what were the tools available at the time when we had the problem? You know, why did you go build this code module? Why didn't you use this open source library that everybody else uses? Well, 10 years ago when we had to solve that problem, that open source library didn't exist. We had to write it ourselves. So now we've been maintaining it for 10 years. At some point, we probably should have, kind of cut off and said, all right, let's stop maintaining that and let's start using what everybody else uses, right? So we all make decisions that we then have to live with. I think a lot of times, and we'd probably be paralyzed if we thought this way, but we don't think about what does this decision mean 10 years from now? If every decision was evaluated that way, we'd probably be in analysis paralysis forever. But especially when you think in terms of APIs and things that you ship and the customers start to rely on, once you ship something, you got to live with it for a long, long time. Assuming that you're
next slide while we're having this conversation. I'm looking at the time, and they got awesome questions coming in. V. Krishna Prasad was just talking about network teams and network and security teams. Do we encounter issues between the network security teams and the other security teams having issues? And Patrick, you just talked about that, right? The security teams used to say, yeah, the network, the VLAN, they'll take care of it. They'll put a firewall, right? And then everything inside of that area, you can have it be whatever, it doesn't matter. But maybe that's not quite the same anymore. So I think these things are changing. So Anders, your way to make the security the path of least resistance.
Yeah, so I actually did some live editing here while I was thinking about what to say, because the slide originally said automate, and I realized that's not really what I meant. What I meant was self-service. And just to give some concrete examples, what I'm talking about here is if you have, if you're working in a large organization with dozens or hundreds or even thousands of applications and services, and new ones being created all the time, you're probably setting up pipelines left, right, and center. You're probably standing up and tearing down environments, whether they're physical, virtual, containers, Kubernetes, whatever, all the time. Instead of kind of going down the road of where you have to ask for permission, and then you have to get things acquired, and then you have to, actually do it, all of those kinds of things. The more you can automate and provide those things as self-service, the more you can also help make sure that things get done right every time. One of the nice things about automation is every time you run the automation, it's going to do the same thing, right? So it's going to be reliable, it's going to be consistent, it's going to be repeatable. Not that you can't write bad automation, obviously you can, but we'll assume that we wrote good automation for the purposes of my point. Now, once you've done that, you've got to be able to access it, and you've got to be able to sort of get value out of that. And one of the biggest values that we've seen is just a trivial example would be customers where when they set up a new release, they have to set up oftentimes a release branch. Oftentimes they have to set up an environment to do the testing in. They may need specific physical artifacts. If they're testing a new device that's going to ship, a phone, a network device, a router, or what have you, you may actually need a physical device to do it. Those things take time, and we've over the years worked with tons of people where we went from, oh, that takes us 8 hours to do, to that now I click a button and 5 minutes later it's done. Well, if you can save people 8 hours of waiting, that's a massive win, right? I mean, that's basically that's a day that you're getting back. Not that hopefully you're sitting around reading Instagram during those 8 hours while you get other people to think about solving your problem for you. So it's not that bad, but nonetheless, it's a context switch, right? It's I can't get on with that problem. I obviously had something I wanted to do with that thing that should take 5 minutes but takes 8 hours to get done. So I think a lot of times when people end run and don't do the right thing, it's because they need to get it done quickly. They're under pressure. It's either either there's a fire, or there's a release date, or there's a boss in the background sort of are we done yet? Are we done yet? Or that sort of thing. And that's when we make stressed out bad decisions and skip steps that we should not be skipping. Obviously, there are some steps that there are times as Patrick says, where you make the change and you broadcast the fact that the change got made, but you don't wait for the approval because you got to get systems down, right? You got to get this up and running, and that's more important in the next 5 minutes than the approval that I should have needed that if I had 24 hours. So self-service helps you a lot, right? Because it means that I'm not going to fat finger this because it's 3 a.m. I'm tired, I'm stressed, I've been up all night, and it's going to happen, in the right way. And I don't have to wait for somebody else to click the button to approve it because I'm going to go through the self-service to do it. That all happens, and I don't need to find somebody who has login permissions on that machine or those sorts of things. I think that takes us a far way. There's more to it than that, obviously.
Self-service, I think, is one of the most important concepts or philosophies, I think, for IT to adopt. If back to our prior conversation about different processes, you notice we don't talk about shadow IT so much anymore. That's the world we live in. It's being done everywhere. Frankly, it's probably why the cloud is so pervasive that it is today, because a credit card and a login and anybody can have a compute center. So same thing for self-service. People will be happy to do it themselves if you make it easy, show them the path or give them a tool, rather than everything has to be a ticket to get IT's attention or whatever the process is. So, you know, I think of it as like frictionless IT, frictionless security. How do you make that both easy and fast wherever you can? And if you can make it self-service, 9 times out of 10, folks are more than happy to help themselves, especially developers. They're used to solving those problems themselves. Security people too. So it's to be an important.
Yeah, even if it's an 80% solution, it only covers 80% of the use cases. You're saving yourself 80% of that work, and only 20% of the work needs hands-on IT involvement. That's
ironically you're
on things that you can't automate. So,
your satisfaction goes up by your customers doing more.
That's right. That's right. Awesome. All right. Next, Patrick, did you have something you wanted to add to this slide?
No, it's something that we see, in our product with Snyk, is that the fact that the developers can see the vulnerabilities and fix them themselves. Again, it's that psychological feeling that they own the problem. They have a choice of fixing the problem. They don't have to rely on others. And some advice, sometimes I say the difference between the world 10 years ago and now is that, like, if IT would have given the same service level than SaaS solutions right now, there wouldn't have been, shadow IT. Okay? And it is that mindset of, like, if you're an organizational entity, you provide services to others that they can consume, think that you're actually a business providing that service to others. And guess what? If people don't like the way you run your business, they're just going to use another way of doing it, and they're going to go to the competitor. And so it's not enough to say, hey, we're self-servicing. You have to level up to the expectations, whether they're really going to use that, and like leave your own model to the door, because think about them as consuming your services and being a user of your services, and kind of that's a different mentality in even dealing, like saying, oh, self-service, yeah, you can file a ticket, that's self-service. No, that's not self-service. So.
That's right. Yeah, and this you bring up a great point, Patrick, that I want to bring up here. Rob asks, what's the risk of eliminating security and start designating our developers with the title of DevSecOps Arc? And you mentioned the Snyk developers basically taking the security in hand. So talk a little bit about that for us.
I think so the fact that they kind of very fast see the vulnerabilities that are in the code, that they are able to change the code quite easily, that takes away the pain. But I don't think they take away the role of security people. Right. So actually what they're doing by automating and making it self-service is actually scaling the security people. So they don't have to worry about like the things that are routine. Those shouldn't be like, it's the same thing as when you have a change advisory board. Like all the standards should be standards and they shouldn't be discussed. It just should be a standard. And it's the same thing with security. Everything that we know that they can do and is like a known thing, just have them do it. It's like there, and let us focus on the other part, which is the harder problems or the emerging problems or the emerging threats as a security. And I think that's the only way people can scale security is kind of by the self-servicing, but it doesn't mean that will be rendered useless. The same way as ops is still there. They automated like the hell out of it, but they'll be there forever. It's just that their role and their job is changing and their content of their job, but it isn't that they're going away. These aspects are aspects of the system. It's not an aspect per se of the role, so they will be there forever.
To use a contemporary analogy, what we're trying to do is flatten the curve for the security people, right? So that they don't have to deal with all the minutia and the easy stuff. and that you can work on the more subtle, emerging, kind of problems, as you say. It's really that simple. I think it is, make self-service a force multiplier. Make self-service something that becomes the easy way to do all the easy things, and then save the human brains for the things that need human brains. That's really where you want to put that effort.
Yep. Next slide, Anders. We got to move forward. We got 10 minutes, and we got lots of questions, and we still have two meaty slides to get through. So the final topic on the Trust Your DevSecOps pipeline is how can we make delivery pipelines that help to integrate new technology and security controls in the process? And we got a lot of questions about pipelines. Danny and Mark are asking questions about pipelines. They're asking, and I'm sort of rephrasing it for them, but how do you get pipelines to trigger each other? Is that something that you should do? And should you block production level pipelines while you're waiting for those other pipelines to run? So that's something for us to consider as we go into the next slide, which are some of the advice that we're giving people around how we do this. And the first one is Patrick.
Yeah, so the reason why I put scan in there, like we talked a little bit about, it isn't just when a code is committed, for example, to the source base that you should run a scan. It is something that needs to happen more frequently, and not only on the trigger of commit. I think like a new term that is coming up is like continuous verification. It's the same thing. We're having these tests run all the time, like monitoring in ops, like intrusion detection and security. It's always there, and those builds need to be running all the time. So I think Anders is like very hard nodding that this is like keeps going on, and probably you can elaborate on whether that triggers new builds or not.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of and yes, heavy head nod clearly, but to get to that specific question, yeah, absolutely, you want to have pipelines triggering other pipelines. As I sort of alluded to before, in the way where you look at it as a measurement problem with frequency of measurement and how deep you measure each time, scan obviously alludes to the frequency, right? How often do we do a particular scan? Well, going back to my original example, and not to belabor too much, but if you've got a scan that takes that is 0 time, and you have a scan that's closer to infinite time, you're going to run one a lot more frequently than you're going to run the other. That's just how it is. And if you try to do that in one pipeline, then your pipelines never finish; they never complete, which is a process problem, but it's also a psychological problem, because you never have a feeling of greenness, you never have a feeling of progress. So I think breaking your work up into multiple pipelines and having them kind of sequentially or in some fashion, trigger each other. You can do it where you have a good CI, you kick off another pipeline that maybe pushes into staging or something like that, or you have a daily security scan that's maybe it's a static code scan that takes a long time to run, so maybe you only do it once a day, so you run it at night if you have a night, assuming that your organization has a notion of night. So many of us don't have that anymore because we're following the sun with a lot of stuff. But I think a lot of it just has to do with do it early, do it often, as often as you can, as early as you can. No earlier and no more often, but
shift to the left. That's right. Yeah. Brian was asking, can the different scanning tools and the different tools that you use, if you have specialized tools, does that become an impediment to flow? Let's talk about that while we move to the next slide.
It can. I mean, one of the things that we've seen, and this is probably a little bit of an outlier in terms of a problem, we had a customer that we worked with who they spent 2 years trying to get a code scanning tool integrated into their pipeline. Part of the problem was they didn't have a very robust pipeline. Part of the problem was it was a very difficult tool to integrate. And part of the problem was sort of organizationally, they had a process where unless the advanced technology team blessed a tool, you would never be allowed to use it. And if they took a year to bless a tool, well, then you waited a year. So I think part of it is you got to kind of loosen up a little bit and allow people to more flexibility to introduce new tooling into your pipeline. And if you're working with pipelines that are inflexible or where you need new releases from the vendor in order to do something or integrate with something, then you're kind of beholden to how flexible scalable that approach is. And I think the good teams and the good pipelines are the ones where they're easy to modify, either in a shareable best practices kind of way, or in a, hey, we're a team off to the side, we have a need for a new tool, maybe it's a little bit unique or at least new in emerging in our organization, but we need to be able to adopt it. We need to be able to make it part of our process without, a year or several months worth of, bureaucratic, wheels turning, if you will. So I think that's, you definitely want to look at how easily can you adopt new policies, new practices, new processes, new tools, new platforms, new everything.
Can you go to the next slide on this?
Yep.
Because that's basically you're saying what you would.
Yeah, that is kind of my sense, right? You want to encourage people to be able to adopt new things, but you don't want complete Wild West either, right? Because you don't want to pay for 48 different tools if you could pay for 2, right? From just from your CFO's perspective. If nothing else, he or she will come knocking on your door if you run your organization that way. But you at the same time you want to be able to do it in such a way that you get best practices and that somebody blazes the trail, and then everybody else can benefit more easily from that trail having been blazed. And that's how you adopt new tools. That's how you jump quickly onto new things to be able to take advantage of them. And
yeah, you learn from other people's successes and failures, and either emulate them or not. Right.
Yeah.
Patrick or Mitch, any comments on this? We have 4 minutes left. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm so appreciative of all the great questions, and I'm so sorry we can't get to all of them. But the questions are great. The conversation's been good. Mitch, thoughts on this slide?
Yeah, again, the pragmatist in me says this is happening anyway. Developers, et cetera, are adopting their own tools, whether you agree with it or not. Embrace it so that we all do it the way we'd like it to do it. So I think that's the world we live in. Let's help make it happen in a good way.
Exactly. I mean, one of the things I learned I think in the first security course I ever took in college was, if your security policy makes it difficult for people to follow your security policies, that is a bad security policy, because people will find ways to achieve their goals, the good goals, the bad ones too, and work around a bad system that just erects barriers in their way. And if you have very strict, inflexible, you have to get sign off or you can't touch the file, those sorts of things, people will find ways to get around it. It's much better to sort of do the approach where you within reason allow people to get on with their job and collect all of the information and all of the metadata so that you know what happened, and that you can build up trust in people because you see that they do the right thing responsibly in the right scenario. They don't jump the gun, they don't act irresponsibly, they don't freak out and edit everything until it's all a mess, and those sorts of things in the prototypical very important file that we're talking about.
So we have 2 minutes left. Patrick, any thoughts on this? Otherwise, I have one more question that I'll ask from the audience here, and then we'll close it down.
I wanted to say that your pipeline is production. So production, you try to avoid legacy. You do the same thing in your pipeline. I tend to think that CI, then comes CD, and I started thinking that the next tongue is actually continuous re-architecturing, and that's swapping in things and out. And the same way that developers, we had TDD, and TDD wasn't actually about the tests. It was about the re-architecturing of the code all the time. So that's the similarity I wanted to point out.
Nice. Yeah, and that's a very important thing is to have that ability to adapt and evolve and change your code, your architecture, and all of those things. A good, solid, automated test suite pays off hugely when you're going off and doing re-architectures, right? Because when am I done? When the tests pass, right? And when am I not done? The tests aren't passing. So it gives you a bright line to know when you're done, but also gives you the confidence that there's a safety net, that I can rip out, I can do an organ transplant, I can do an engine replacement in my car while driving 90 miles an hour down the freeway. I've never done that. I would never drive 90 miles an hour down the freeway.
You can't do it now.
Yeah, I can't do it. Well, actually, now you can, but
now you could. Yeah, now you could.
But you know, it gives you that flexibility and that confidence that there is a safety net there, which I think is very important. So Sam, back to you.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we are at the end of the time here. I want to thank our panelists, Patrick Dubois from Snyk, Anders from Cloudbees, and Mitch from Accelerated Strategies Group. Thank you, the three of you, for joining us. Fantastic conversation, getting a lot of great comments back already. I think people learned a lot. I certainly did. And thank you, audience, for your questions. This is really what this is all about, is connecting with other humans and trying to learn together. So see you guys next time. See you folks next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Be well.